Okay. Everybody stay calm. So, after I recorded the intro to this video, I got a notification from GEARBOX saying that they had some paddles on the way to me. I also don't think I mentioned, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation with ADIDAS and also what's going on with the rhombus ripples because there's some back and forth, and I'm going to clear all that up. But first and foremost, I had somebody else open the gearbox package already while I wasn't looking. So I'm going to pull these up right now and I'm going to see what's going on here with this package. Okay. Oh, How's it going, everyone? Rafa the Pickleball Tech Dude here, and welcome to This Week in Pickleball episode 4. So, if you're wondering what happened to This Week in Pickleball Tech, I'm essentially deciding to turn this into my podcasting platform. There is too much that I have to yap about at this point to not do something like this. So we're just going to start off here on episode 4. And we're probably going to make this a weekly to bi-weekly thing, just sort of discussing not just pickleball paddles, but also talking about a lot of other stuff in pickleball that I'm actually passionate about. So for this week, we're going to go over a couple of housekeeping things, including a project I'm working on that I could really use your guys' help on, the database that I'm building out for paddles, including a new metric that I'm wondering if anybody has any input on. We'll also talk about putting a nice little bow on the entire USA pickleball saga for now, as well as a recap of the YOLA event. And then, we'll go ahead and finish up with a bunch of paddles that I've been testing. I do have some good ones here in store. Don't get ahead of me now. Anyways. So to start with those housekeeping things, the first thing I do want to mention is that I do have a Discord channel. The invite link is going to be in the description there. That's where I announce all of my videos as well as announce little tidbits of information that I get throughout the week. Probably a lot of stuff that'll make it onto a podcast with full details, but just little things to sort of pique your guys' interest if you're wondering. So feel free to join that there. The second thing in this project that I'm working on, so my significant other is in medical school, does have a team going on a medical mission trip out to Guatemala, and that's going to happen in April. So I, of course, get a lot of my paddles that you're seeing around me that I'm going to show you today. I receive those paddles to review them. And then once I'm done, there's generally not much more that they do other than become part of my background. I have boxes and boxes of paddles here that are off screen. So instead of just keeping those here or selling them for my personal gain, what I'm doing is I am going to go ahead and I've put a spreadsheet down below. I'm going to be selling these paddles, none of which have been played with for probably more than 15 hours at most, severely discounted prices, and all of the proceeds from that are going to go directly to my girlfriend and her medical team, who otherwise would have to pay out of pocket without fundraising for that trip. So the goal is $2,000. Anything over that is going to go towards other members of the team. But if you would like to donate or contribute to that at all, again, that spreadsheet is in the description and it's got all the details there. The air just turned on in my house, which is really weird. It's been pretty cold here in Dallas, actually, so it's kind of nice that the air is finally turning on a bit. I've been sort of bundled up here, and this is a nice little segue, actually. Right now, I'm wearing a cotton knit sweatshirt from Into the AM. I was looking at my closet recently, and I noticed that a lot of my stuff is just pickleball related shit or just things that are super graphic. And when it comes down to, just wanting to wear something out, something sleek and nice, whether it's dressy casual or dressy, I didn't have a lot of options there. So that's why I went over, I checked out Into the AM. I think they have a really great thing going. They not only do cover really nice graphic tees, if that is your style, but for somebody like me who really wanted to sort of tone down the wardrobe and really get something, again, just a little bit more sleek, cover the basics, that I think Into the AM has really, really nice stuff. This exact sweater I wore to the USAP Media Day event. I wore to the YOLA event. I'll probably wear it to events in the future. So if you do want to check out Into the AM, I think they have, again, some really premium and nice basics. Make sure you go, link in the description as well. My code Rafa will get you 10% off over there as well. And the most important thing to me is that everything over there is actually super affordable. I'm not one to spend $60 to $70 on a shirt, and luckily you don't have to with Into the AM. So shout out to those guys. Moving forward, now what I want to talk about is I am creating that database here. Working on that, trying to sort of backlog a bunch of paddles that I'm sure people are going to be interested in. Going through that sorting process now, especially before I send some of those off, hopefully, to fund the Guatemala trip. But something that I've been considering, for those of you who are curious, a lot of what reviewers use in order to perform spin and power and pop stats is a machine called the Stalker Pro 3S. It's, to my knowledge, which is not extensive, by the way, it's to my knowledge the only radar gun on the market that also measures spin on top of power. And so that's why we all use it. I think either Braden or Chris was one of the first ones to whip that out. But a metric that's present on the radar that nobody uses, but I'm kind of curious to see what you guys think, if it might be useful, is something called roll down velocity. So that gun is primarily made for baseball, and the velocity that we essentially display for power is an average of the ball speed as soon as it is exiting the paddle face. And that is very helpful for measuring power in general. But something I've been curious about is that the roll down velocity in baseball is not the speed of the ball as it leaves the pitcher's hand, but rather the speed of the ball as it exits over home plate, as it reaches the batter. So the roll down velocity in this context, when it comes to power testing, is really what is the speed of the ball as it gets to you, the server, as it hits the ground right before you strike it. And so, in my opinion, it's kind of a measure of how much energy the ball is losing as it gets to you, as you're actually prepared to hit it. I mean, usually that roll down velocity, to give you guys some context, looks like between 15 to 18 miles per hour on average. So, of course, it's still a little bit imperfect. A lot of this has to do with what ball you're using, where you're testing, whether it's outdoors or indoors. You, of course, have the friction from the wind, or rather wind resistance, I should say, on the ball. And a lot of things to take into account, which that's a huge one when you're dealing with a ball with plastic holes. But in reality, I think it could be interesting to sort of look at how much energy, again, that paddle is providing the ball initially, and then how much energy that ball is losing as it actually reaches you. That number does look different from paddle to paddle, but I think in the end, regardless of whether the paddle is hitting the ball at 55 or 57 miles per hour, the miles per hour change on the roll down velocity side is also somewhat of a similar difference. So I'm not sure the percentages would be too different. So I'm gathering all that data, but if any of you guys have any input or any thoughts as to whether or not that might be helpful, or if that's just sort of a throwaway statistic for our purposes, definitely let me know down below, because I'm curious. Definitely need some input there. But yeah, I think that takes care of everything on the housekeeping standpoint. Again, links are in the description for everything I just talked about. But now let's sort of dive into putting a nice little bow here on the USAP saga. Here's a quick sort of change of pace for you guys. 10 points to Gryffindor for anybody who can sort of name this background, where it came from, why it has relevant history to me. But in any case, I want to put a nice little bow here on the USAP conversation. I feel like It happened about a month ago that we had media day, and there's a few things that I've left unsaid for far too long. So to sort of wrap up the conversation here, I do want to say that either the day you're watching this or maybe a couple up to 1 to 2 days after, you will see a post from me, and it will be the entire footage of everything that happened on USAP Media Day. Um, Literally everything. Every single little bit, raw and uncut, all the questions that were asked, all the topics discussed, all the things that we saw, everything is going to be in that video. And I'm going to do my best to clean the audio as best that I can so that you can at least hear what's going on. But overall, that's going to be the raw and uncut footage. What essentially has been left unsaid on my side is that I feel like there were 1 to 2 overarching topics that really were massive points of discussion during the media day. And one of these topics I felt like was very not well received by USAP, and the other one I feel like actually where there was some headway made. So to discuss the topic that was not very well received, I think that that was the destructive testing aspect of paddles. I think that that is one area that PPL definitely has a leg up on USAP on, and it's definitely something that USAP should be considering. What I essentially mean by that is when the topic of paddles breaking the rules down the line was brought up, one of the main things that manufacturers suggested as a way to make sure that this doesn't happen in the future was to introduce a destructive testing protocol to USAP's current testing standards so that you can essentially catch people before they release onto market and potentially cause harm to competitors who are actually trying to follow the rules. And USAP's response to this essentially was it takes far too long and it costs, and not that it costs, that it was never brought up, but too many resources would be required to do that. And my hope is that that was essentially, to be honest with you guys, that was essentially half of media day, was just back and forth on whether or not it's up to USAP to determine the life cycle of a paddle and to determine this curve of how we should expect certain paddles to behave so that we can prevent break-in for paddles that go beyond the PB core limits. And I think that it was sort of an unproductive conversation, to be honest. And it's one that I'd like to see USAP address in the following way. I would hope that we could take a paddle that might be representative of what a paddle break-in is or what it looks like for a certain paddle type to break in over time. Say that we look at paddles with floating cores, polypropylene based, versus paddles that are diving board polypropylene based. I think the terms linear and non-linear power have emerged for these two, although I'm not sure that that necessarily means much. But just take representative paddles and then test those, see how they react to PB core after 0 hits versus 500 versus 1,000, etc. And then use those to sort of gauge where a paddle should be at after a certain journey in its break-in. I don't think that that's necessarily difficult to do, although I will say that USAP did mention that PB core testing takes up to an hour on each paddle. I didn't quite get to why it takes so long for each one to happen, but I think the solution to that would hopefully be to just get more machines to produce that testing. I know it's not that cut and dry, and actually, when I was watching John Q's video on USAP versus PPL and how they're testing things, one of the main things that came to mind was how much PPL is charging paddle companies for things, or not PPL, but rather UPAA is charging companies for marketing, licensing, paddle testing, etc., and how much more that is than USAP. So while USAP gets more submissions, I think in the long run, in the next 3 to 5 years, it'll be UPAA that is getting more money to accomplish that testing. So I would expect PPL to, from a testing capacity standpoint, go beyond what USAP is currently at, but it's purely a monetary game. And with UPAA obviously having those clear ties to UPA, I think that it's not far fetched to say that what I've just said. Um, so I'm hoping that, regardless of the financial standpoint, if USAP can target their finances in the right places, that they can hopefully increase the efficiency of their testing and, increase their capacity to test for destructive capabilities or paddles that break to benefit, I think is the term that's being used. So that was topic one. Topic two, one that USAP was more receptive to, which I think is great, is the penalty for companies that break the rules. I've had this discussion several times with many companies, and I think that something that isn't quite conveyed a lot is how companies that are often found out of spec, it's normally because they can't afford to create a paddle that doesn't go out of spec. I think that a few smaller, more name brand companies fell into that category until they gained notoriety, and were able to just financially afford that. That being a paddle that stays in spec over time. But I think in the long run, the math is relatively simple. And it works out to the fact that if I can create a paddle that's going to make me $10 million, and the consequence for doing that, even if I'm eventually caught, is a slap on the wrist, then I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do that every single time. Even if the penalty is $1 million, if I know that it's going to make me 10 and the penalty is 1 million, again, the math there is simple. So I think that ultimately what needs to happen here is some type of either severe financial punishment, or we're looking at, blacklisting from USAP's media list. Say, if you're caught going out of spec, you cannot have a paddle approved on USAP's list for a year, for 7-8 months, something that financially the sales that I'm incurring, even if it works, is not going to outlast the penalty effects. I don't know if that penalty looks like one that is 10 million or one that is 15 million, 20 million, whatever that is. But in the end, two things need to happen in order to make a penalty effective. One, it needs to be a large enough consequence. And two, it needs to be enforceable to a degree that companies would actually be incentivized to do things right the first time around. So, even if the penalty that's settled on is not being able to be listed on USAP's website, not being able to seek approval for a year, if I'm not going to get caught for a year to a year and a half, then again, the math is easy. The revenue is there and I'm going to do it. So I haven't given a lot of thought into what that looks like, but I think that USAP definitely needs to address both of these things in a big way, either this year or next year. It needs to happen fast. So that's pretty much all that I have to say over what I've seen from USAP's media day. I'm hoping that we can sort something out similar for PPL, for UPAA. Something else that I gleaned from John's video is that UPAA rather, their answers seemed a lot more buttoned up. And I think that a major contributor to that is the fact that they weren't standing in a room of 30 people, media, manufacturers, etc., all ready to tear them to shreds and ask a lot of questions and probe into their process. I think if they were in a similar spot, you would have found that they scrambled a lot in the way that I think you'll see that USAP does as well through my video. So yeah, there's a lot of factors at play here. I don't think that either that what I've seen from PPL and what I experienced at USAP so far has really allowed me to form an opinion on who's doing it better and who is poised to do it better in the future. I'm just looking at this from a financial perspective, that I would expect PPL to be doing a better job, ceteris paribus from everything that's going on right now in 3 to 5 years. All right, well, welcome back briefly into the pickleball dungeon here. Want to introduce just a personal segment to let you guys, connect with me a little bit more, know a little bit more about what I'm about. I'm a massive foodie. I don't think that that is an uncommon trait to have, but I'm a massive foodie. Look at me. When I mean I'm a massive foodie, I mean like if I wasn't doing pickleball on social media, I would be doing cooking videos. And I gave it a stab on TikTok a long time ago. If anybody does go and find that, I will find you and I will end you. But so don't go looking. But yeah, so this segment, I'm going to be trying something new, whether it's a drink, a snack, some type of food. Just want to try something new and give you guys just a live reaction to it. So I am big on energy drinks, going way back when. If I can encourage you to not ever drink energy drinks, I would definitely do that. But for me, I'm hooked at this point. I'm too far gone, but don't be like me. But today we're going to be trying the raspberry acai green tea flavor of Celsius. I think you guys can see that ish. But I hate acai bowls. Like raspberries though. So it's also a raspberry acai green tea. So I'm going to give you guys live reaction on this. You know what? That's not bad. I think the green tea saves it. If any of you guys drink is it peach or like peach mango green tea variation? I think it's the green tea flavor that's coming through and kind of saving this. But yeah, the raspberry acai is meh. Kind of reminds me of grapes ish. So yeah, not my favorite, but it's going to do the trick for me to finish out this pod. All right, let's talk USAP Media Day. What a time that was. First and foremost, huge shout out to Yola, huge shout out to Austin, Richard, everybody who sat down with me for interviews. Shout out to everybody else at Yola who made that entire event happen. Brian, all of them. It was a very well put together event. Not that I expected anything less, but I think it's one of the first major events that content creators sort of ranging from larger to smaller were all able to attend together. And I feel like, everything was very well coordinated. It was kind of an interesting event. I mean, we essentially we were put up in a hotel there in Vegas for the majority of the time, but during the actual unveiling of the paddles, we were all inside the house of one of Yola's youth pro players, U12 pro players, Jack Luffridge. So huge shout out to Jack and shout out to the entire Luffridge family for having us. They have an incredible home there in Vegas. Two-tiered pickleball courts that are overlooking the Vegas skyline. It was beautiful. I had a great time. Unfortunately, from my personal experience, the only thing that happened there that I was very sad I didn't get to experience was that my flight was delayed out of Dallas by probably 2 or 3 hours, and so I missed Andre Agassi while he was there for the first couple of hours of dinner in the evening. That was really unfortunate. Essentially, where I walked in was the first thing that I saw was Braden from Pickleball Effect with a bunch of icing in his hair. And I didn't find out until afterwards that Steve Aoki was there, which was, again, wild sort of connection there that we had. But Steve Aoki was there, and he had caked Braden and Richard and somebody else that I'm forgetting. But that was hilarious to watch. I'm pretty sure Braden didn't even know who Steve Aoki was, which is wild to me. He's an old man, but but yeah, that was an interesting way to start the experience. Got to play a lot with the Pro 4 paddles. I'm going to tell you more about those in a little bit, but I think it's a great idea that I think a lot of companies should mirror, bringing a lot of content creators together, a lot of people with contrasting styles and opinions, giving us their version of the story. What do they think their pro paddles have to offer? Why do they think that they're different from other paddles? Opening themselves up to interviews, especially at a time like now, when they coming off of a year with such massive controversy. I think that this was a really smart move, just from a business perspective, but also the overarching sense that I got from Yola and the reason why this event was held in general was that they were trying to be more transparent. I don't think I asked a single question where I felt like, whoever I was speaking to, I interviewed Austin Kim, a product manager over the Pro 4s and a lot of other Yola's products, and I interviewed Richard, the CEO of Yola. And the overarching sense that I got was that they were not shying away from these questions of controversy. I asked them straight up about any connections with UPA versus USAP, the whole debacle with, their 3S paddle being the first to be approved under UPA's temporary guidelines. Also, of course, asked about the delisting, what that looked like, how exactly it went down, how they were looking to respond, what changed between now and the Pro 4 launch in terms of QC and QA. Essentially, how can we trust that their paddles are going to be approved by both bodies and stay approved by both bodies? And I think that, the impression that I got is that they took a lot of the feedback that they received from the community and, they watched it all. They were part of it and they watched how everything unfurled online. And they took a lot of those criticisms to heart and poured a lot of that into the process for the Pro 4s. So where I think a lot of people are going to look at these paddles and think that, they are the same, just priced higher. I think that that's not necessarily going to be the case, but I do think, looking at the paddles holistically, they do play similar to a previous paddle launch. I think I can say that, and I don't think that's going to be a hot take. But essentially that means at this point, what facets can I find about the paddle that would make it worth it for you to pay, the extra money for them, because they are going to be priced a little bit higher. I did post that full breakdown video of what to expect from the Pro 4s and how that price is going to compare to the 3Ss. I'm looking for ways to justify the price increase. And I do think that those reasons exist, but I also do think they're going to matter to a certain target audience. Yola already has a broad audience, but I think, certain people in particular are going to like the changes enough to make the jump, and other people won't. And I think that that's, that should be expected. That's a pretty common occurrence for any company that launches a wildly successful paddle and then, is trying to innovate and do the next big thing. But you're going to see those interviews with Austin and with Richard in the coming days. You're also going to see a full review from me. You're probably going to see a review of the Perseus and AGASSI models first. And then you'll see the reviews on the other shapes later, for the same reason that I said in my breakdown video, which is that the Perseus and AGASSI shapes will come first, and then the every other shape is going to come later. So that's sort of the timeline that we should expect there. The earliest that we can post any type of review content is going to be March 4th at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So I'm not sure if I'll follow that timeline exactly, or if my stuff will come out a little bit closer to the actual, I think that's the pre-order date. So I will most likely have content out by then. But we've also got the Franklin C45 launch coming up soon. So a lot of stuff happening in close proximity, and I'm going to make sure that you guys are all well informed, but, just trying to keep a timeline that makes sense together. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much everything I gleaned from the experience. And also want to give a major shout out to everybody that I got to hang out with there. I got to grab dinner with I'm thinking around the table. I had Brian from Building Pickleball. We also had Kyle from Dink Smash Media. Then we had Braden. We had Isaac and Chris from Pickleball Studio. We also had Aaron from also part of Pickleball Effects crew, but and then we had David from Tickle My Pickle. Um, what a group of guys. They are, every single content creator that you see, I think, is extremely genuine and super fun to actually, hang out and meet in person. Not a single one of them is ever going to feel bothered if you say hi to them, in public. And yeah, I get the sense that it's a group of guys that are really just trying to actually, do things right, do their own thing, find their own style, navigate this crazy world of paddles together and, just produce the best content as possible. So I wish nothing but the best for all of them. We're going to be meeting up at more events, as the year rolls on. So I like to think of these guys as friends and as colleagues now. We have a big group chat where we all talk about stuff together. But yeah, I mean, let me think about who else I met while I was out there. I also met a Steven from STS Pickleball, who is also a really nice guy. Shout out to Steven. Shout out to Steven Jr., who is STS Pickleball, and shout out to Steven, his father, who was also there at the event helping Steven record. Both are pretty good players and great guys to hang out with. Also, shout out to Lewis from Pickleball Pursuit. He is a quote unquote too old to hang out with us at dinner until 1 a.m. that night that we were all there, but another cool guy. Probably takes the crown of 3-5 at best from Chris, while Chris is off actually getting better. I'm fucking with you. Lewis is probably not even gonna see this, but he's a funny guy. Everybody was just really cool to hang out with, and I get the sense that there is a lot of good stuff to expect from this group moving forward, and I think it's awesome to be a part of it. It's awesome to be friends with the people who are part of it. And yeah, I'm just along for the ride. I'm excited for everything that's to come. But with all that said, let's go ahead. I'm gonna move on back inside, and let's go ahead and talk some paddles.
Hey, it's me. I'm back. Most of this video is going to look different because I'm going to be in my normal setup talking about the paddles, but let's go ahead. Let me cover the couple of things that I essentially forgot to cover. The first thing, or rather, and what's going on with GEARBOX here, which I'll talk about in a second because this is kind of crazy. So first and foremost, I'll start with ADIDAS because that is just something that I can't actually provide any information on. I just want to let you guys know a conversation was had between myself and ADIDAS this week, and that is about all that I can share. Can't share anything about the outcome, the paddles that they've been teasing that pro players have been playing with. Can't share anything, any details. But the reality is that ADIDAS has something coming. I think that is about all that I can share. I think if you were deep in the weeds about pro pickleball or have been sort of following what's been going on with Fed and Mari Humber going to ADIDAS, then I'm sure you were already aware of this. But just know something is coming from ADIDAS. I'm going to be a part of it. At least, rather, I'm going to get you guys information on it. I'll play test those, have the review, all that good stuff. So just know that is coming if you were curious. The second thing is rhombus. So a lot of people have been asking me, hey, so there are still ripples circulating and people are playing with them and saying that they're legal, but they're not, right? That is not the case. So let me give you guys an example here. Here is an example of a ripple that is illegal. And the reason why this is illegal is if you look a bit closer here, you can see that this has a PB core stamp right here. This makes this paddle illegal. These are the paddles that were tested by USAP and actually ended up failing PB core testing. So that is not legal. And I know this is going to confuse you. Where is my other ripple? Is this it? Yeah, this is it. So the difference is there are ripples circulating like this. There are actually a couple versions of this. There should be an alpha, a production, and a beta model. This, for example, is the beta. I think you might be able to see the ridges here in the face. But the reality is that these are legal. I've confirmed over and over again with Dong from Rhombus, any ripple that does not have the PB core stamp on it, which is very ironic, is actually legal for use. I personally still use the R2 beta because it is slightly less powerful than the production model. I personally didn't have any issues with the edge guard coming loose or any of the other QC issues that forced them to create the production model after the beta. But I could take this to a tournament and this would be fine. This is still on the USAPA list. But the one with the PB core stamp is not. So to sort of put it simply, PB core stamp not legal, no PB core stamp legal for USAP right now. All right, so now let's talk GEARBOX. First and foremost, I'm gonna get it out of my box here. So I finally have the final version of what this new Pro Ultimate elongated paddle is going to look like, which again, this is supposed to be the replacement for the PB, not the PB, for the PPE, the Pro Power Elongated. This is the Pro Ultimate Elongated. Again, this is proudly displaying here. So what it looks like here is a PB core stamp, as well as a USAP approved stamp and a USAP Quiet approve as well. You can also find that information on the back here. What I also like is that GEARBOX normally sends content creators a deck of everything about the technology. You can actually find that here now on the inside of the label. So I think that's cool. That's a nice little touch there. But yeah, the thing is that I've been testing a version of this that well, there was an initial version that I was testing that the swing weight was around 128, and I was subsequently sent a second version, and that version had a swing weight closer to 123. So I was told that that was the incorrect version, the incorrect initial version that I was sent. So now we have this new version. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put that. I have my graffiti right here next to me. I'm going to put my paddle in here, and I'm going to put the number on the screen right now once I figure out what that number is. So I'm going to see if they've changed anything with the swing weight there or not, and I'm going to get out and play with this a little bit. This paddle, I can say a lot about this. This is going to be the Pro Ultimate technology that you all know and love with the difference in fiber modulus that goes out towards the edges. It's a paddle that breaks in very slowly and pretty minimally over time, so I'm expecting this paddle to not feel good initially and then get a lot better over time, very similar to the Hyper. And but you know, more testing to come to confirm that. And what else? This paddle in particular, this is not going to have a discount code when it launches on March 18th. But I will try to get a video up as quickly as possible about it. And yeah, it's this is going to be interesting. I'm curious to see how this compares to the Pro Power Elongated, which I still have, and I will hit alongside it. My main complaint of the Model 2 that I was playing with is that the where on the Pro Power Elongated, it felt like it needed reinforcement on the bottom side here. So there's a lot of tape going sort of throat up to the middle. That paddle is almost the opposite of the PPE in that the sweet spot needed more reinforcement up at the top. So almost like the upper hemisphere. So I'm interested to see if this one feels similar, but right off the bat, feels kind of heavy, but not necessarily what I am used to. They don't display any sort of their own measured stats on here, which I honestly think is for the better. I think it's easier I prefer to verify that info myself, but this is going to be, this is coming very soon on the horizon, middle of March. Now, what I also have in this box is a new paddle that GEARBOX is launching. What I'm going to do here, the reason I'm looking around here, found them. So I've been sent the production model of these paddles, but I've been hitting the prototypes. I have been really enjoying the prototypes of this paddle, and so what I'm going to share is this right here. This is the prototype. This is completely blank. I'm not 100% sure this is what the production models I'm hitting are going to feel like, but this is what's coming next from GEARBOX. This is it has an edge guard, has a 3K carbon fiber weave, so it's not the sort of super textured raw carbon fiber that you're used to. I can confirm that the production model face does feel very similar. The only reason I'm showing you an unmarked version is because I'm not allowed to show you what the graphics or name of this paddle is going to be. But this is what's on the horizon. What's going to be inside it is the the SST 2.0 carbon rib core. So just to give a general understanding, this is going to look very similar to the SST core that is inside the normal, the Ultimates and every other Pro paddle that GEARBOX has, but it's going to be in this form factor. And what I felt from this one so far is this is almost like an elevated Gen 2 paddle. It feels very similar to what I'm used to from a Gen 2 paddle technology, but it honestly feels like there is an extra bit of oomph, almost like you put springs into a Gen 2 paddle core. And that's what it feels like. Like the vibration dampening is really good, and yet the translation of power that I input versus what I feel is not quite the same. It feels like the ball launches off different and more than what I put into it. So I think that a lot of people are going to like this because it feels very similar to what they're used to. It will not be as powerful as the Pro Ultimate or just the Pro Series paddles in general, but it's a little bit more friendly to what the average player is used to. And again, there's going to be an Integra shape as well as an elongated shape. So and again, can't share what the name is, what the probably what the stats are, honestly. Also can't share when this will come out or the price it'll release at, but I can confirm that while the Ultimate Elongated is not going to have a discount code, or rather, you can still use my code RAFA at checkout. It actually helps me out a lot, but it will simply give me credit for referring you. These paddles will be discounted 10% using my discount code RAFA. So clearly GEARBOX is trying to make a paddle that's a little bit more approachable. And if they're offering a 10% discount, I think it's fair to assume this paddle is probably going to be cheaper than the Pro Series paddles. But that is yet to be determined. The Ultimate Elongated will be $280, similar to everything else in the Ultimate series. So that's what's on the horizon from GEARBOX. Now let's jump into the rest. There's a lot.
And finally, welcome back into the Pickleball Dungeon one more time. That might be a better name for this pod. This Week in Pickleball Dungeon. Who knows? We'll figure out a good name. But last thing I'm going to cover here is quick thoughts, quick hits on paddles that I've been hitting for several weeks now. The JOOLA event and, of course, a lot of other big companies coming out with stuff have really, in general, a lot of companies coming out with a lot of stuff back to back to back to back to back. It's been a lot to handle. So I've definitely fallen behind in the reviews area. But let me give you some quick thoughts here on paddles that are either going to at least get mini reviews or would definitely have gotten reviews if I have more time. And maybe in the future, I will still have that time. First up on the docket is the AVOURA RHAPSODY 13 millimeter. So what makes this paddle interesting, if you haven't heard of AVOURA, this brand is partially owned by the Dawson family. Callan Dawson was a touring pro on the PPA for quite some time. They operate not only this brand, but they also operate a tennis center out in California, I believe, that is currently under threat of needing to close down the vast majority of their pickleball courts due to noise complaints. So that is a story that was all over. I'm pretty sure it made national headlines back when it was initially happening. So if there's any way, I believe it's the Bobby Riggs Tennis Center. I could be completely wrong. I'm gonna fact check that once I'm done here. But if there's any way you can support that, would definitely go and do that. But this is the debut paddle from their brand AVOURA Pickleball, the Rhapsody 13 millimeter. What makes this paddle so interesting to me is essentially, instead of Gen 2 foam injections, this paddle actually has a metallic gel that they inject along the perimeter for that added stability and vibration dampening. I would say that's the number one thing I experience on this paddle is some serious vibration dampening and very, very nice stability on the edges of the paddle for a 13 millimeter paddle. I think this year is really the year when having paddles that are less than 16 millimeter are really going to have their moment in terms of actually being usable, having larger sweet spots, having higher twist weight, a little bit more stability. This paddle is not only lightning quick in the hands, which I think is a testament to the bit of a stranger shape that they chose, but it also feels very nice. It feels like what I would expect a 16 millimeter to feel like, at least in the past. So I think that this is definitely one to watch and one that I would have at least given a mini review on. There's a lot of things to like here. Pretty nice and broad sweet spot. The one thing I would say that maybe concerns me is that the gel insert is hand injected. So I did have a call with some of the creative minds behind this paddle, and I do know for a fact that, everything is done with care when it comes to the injections around the edges. I just think in general, doing things by hand in a paddle is something that really sort of catches my attention, especially when it comes to durability. But, I played with this paddle for at least 5-6 hours of gameplay total, had no issues whatsoever. I mean, just like listening to it, we're going to hear a paddle later that you can definitely get some of that glue rattling on, and I hear absolutely nothing whatsoever out of this one. So this has been a really fun one to play with, and I do have more thoughts that I might share at a later time. Now I want to look at the newest stuff that's been coming out of VATIC Pro. So pretty much being the Bloom paddles. So what I do want to say, and I do think this will come out in a review for anybody who doesn't see this segment, but I think that there is a slight problem with the Bloom Sega. Now, to preface really quickly, because I don't think I did a review on this, the V7 and Prism Segas were some of my favorite all-court paddles that came out towards the end of last year. All-court, leaning low power, I would say. I think that Daryl and everybody at VATIC did a really awesome job with those paddles. I'm pretty sure it made it onto my nominations list for all-court paddle of the year. I mean, I truly, truly enjoyed those, particularly the V7. Now, I do think that there is a small problem with the Sega, and I think it all comes down to balance point. Something that I have found a lot with wide body paddles is that it actually benefits them a little bit more to be balanced a little bit more head heavy, just because already with the shape being shorter, the sweet spot is shifted down than what a normal player who doesn't play with a wide body, which by the way is the vast majority of the market. Like if you and your buddies play with a wide body paddle, I hate to break this to you, but right now at this moment, the reason why there was that tweet a few weeks ago from Jay Zanatowicz saying, oh, I'm going to say it now, that before anybody else does, that standard shape paddles are going to be the main doubles paddles. The reason he said that is because honestly, not that many people play with one. We're experiencing recency bias here online because we do tend to have a lot of wide body paddles as content creators that come through our door. But anyways, I digress. the problem with a lot of wide bodies that aren't leaning a little bit more head heavy is that the sweet spot is already shifted down from what a normal player is used to. And then on top of that, if it's not balanced head heavy, the sweet spot shifts down here towards the middle, a little bit closer to the handle than what you feel comfortable actually swinging at. So the main problem with the Sega is that there is a lot of dead area up here. A normal wide body paddle takes a sweet spot that feels a little bit more ovalish and just sort of brings it down a bit and then sort of extends it out to this sort of area. Just more circular, I would say. The problem with the Sega is that the sweet spot feels like a bar that runs down the middle of it like this. So there's nothing wrong with it from a stability standpoint. I'd say off-center shots feel pretty nice. It very overarchingly has a very similar feel to the V7 and Prism, as you would expect when it comes down to the actual ball striking. But when it at least in the sweet spot area, when it comes to shots up at the top and up at the bottom, I think these are areas that need major reinforcement from lead tape. And it's one of the reasons why I honestly think that the way that they've constructed the Sega is not what I would have expected and not what I would have personally liked. When it comes down to the Prism blooms, which I do have here, and I've hit both of these paddles are awesome. I have a completely contrasting opinion of these versus the Segas. I think that these paddles in general, which again, these paddles, to be clear, specifically the budget paddles, the Prism series, these are budget paddles, more for the not entry level. I'd say beginner player, not entry level, a little bit higher than that. But consistently the V7 and flash shape. I said Prism earlier. I meant the flash shape. These paddles and probably still are some of the best budget paddles on the market. I don't know if it's particularly close. I think maybe 11.6 with the Jelly Beans has come close. I think that I don't think that the JOOLA Agassi Edge touches these. But these paddles are great. These paddles just take what you know and love about the V7 and the Flash Prism and just make it a wide body. And these paddles do definitely feel a bit more on the head heavy side. And as a testament to that, you can sort of see the ball marks going up a little bit up here. No issues whatsoever hitting balls up here at all. I think I probably prefer the 14 millimeter just because it feels it gives you more of that sort of stiffer feedback. The face feels like you can get shot consistency across it. It does have that stiff feedback response, which I tend to prefer when it comes to wide body paddles in particular, because they can get a little bit crazy with the vibration dampening. Makes me feel like I'm not as connected to the ball. But these shapes are awesome. And there's also, I do have a limited edition Glacier paddle. So I think I will do a review on these paddles. I'm probably going to give away that Glacier paddle because it's beautiful. I'm going to flash a picture of it. Probably get some B-roll. But yeah, those are the blooms from VATIC Pro. Next, another paddle series that I plan to review before all the craziness with JOOLA and the Franklin C45s coming out soon, and all that good stuff. But the SUPERCOURTs from Chorus. So again, these paddles come in this HX shape, their hybrid shape, EX elongated shape, and the SX shape. And for those of you who don't remember, I did a review on the original SUPERCOURT paddle months ago. And that paddle was Gen 1 constructed, essentially, no foam injections, but did have an extra layer of carbon fiber, which in my opinion gives the paddle a sort of similar to the VATIC, the Prism Blooms, gives it more of a stiffer feel, but it's across the entire face. In my mind, when it comes down to how a player perceives a sweet spot, it really comes down to how much can you perceive the ball striking to be similar across all different parts of the paddle. And so, and if you don't have a sweet spot that's particularly forgiving or plush, like a Honolulu J2K, you want the face to feel the same. If it feels stiff, make it feel consistent at a minimum. That's something that the Prism Blooms do really well. That's something that this paddle does particularly well. But when essentially the difference between the original SUPERCOURT and this SUPERCOURT is that this paddle is thermoformed as opposed to having the extra layer of carbon fiber. And I think it achieves a really similar effect, and yet removing that extra layer does give the sweet spot, which does feel pretty I should say, it gives the sweet spot that forgiving feel that it was missing when it just had the extra carbon fiber layer. And it is also foam injected now. It's essentially your classic Gen 2 constructed paddle. Raw carbon fiber top sheet here for the face layer. But this paddle gets really great spin, feels really good in the hands. The construction all the way through the handle feels very solid. The handle is great on this paddle. It's a really nice circumference, nothing weird about it. It's something I do want to note because that's becoming super prevalent in paddles nowadays, is just having these like weird rectangular shaped handles and all this like weird shit. Just like butt caps that are super thick. I hate that. I really, really hate it. And not something that I noticed with this one. Nice thin neck taper here for the two-handed backhands, which this handle length is already pretty large. There's not too much I don't like about this paddle, to be honest. And with discount code, which again is RHAPSODY pretty much everywhere, this paddle is $108. And to be honest, it does hit. Let's compare this SX to the Bloom for a moment. This paddle does hit harder. Has a consistent feel across most of the face, maybe lacking a little bit down the bottom corners. As you can see, the shape tapers inward, so that would explain that. But having that tapered in also shifts that balance point upward, which, getting back to what I was saying earlier, so it feels a little bit more natural to strike, especially more than like a Sega Bloom. But the sweet spot is a little bit more plush and forgiving towards the center, and then a little bit more firm and responsive, but still nice feeling on the outside. The $18 difference that is between these two is almost worth it just because of the power level. I will say that between the two, just to sum it up, if I was going to choose between a Prism Bloom and the SUPERCOURT, it comes down to power versus spin. So the Prism Bloom faces feel extremely gritty, like very, very, very gritty. Stick to your shirt level gritty. The SUPERCOURTs do also feel gritty, but not to the same level. The SUPERCOURTs are more powerful, though, than the Prism Blooms. Even the 14 millimeter probably gets close to where the SUPERCOURTs are at, which they are all 16 millimeter. But I think the SUPERCOURTs hit a little bit harder. And they also SUPERCOURTs have a little bit more variety, having the elongated and hybrid shape. So it really all comes down to, do you want more power or do you want more spin? The $18 difference in between them, because again, Prism Blooms will go down to almost 90 with RHAPSODY discount code, and the SUPERCOURTs go down to 108. The difference there really just has to deal with power versus spin. Which one do you want more? And if you ask me, is it worth it to pay the extra 18 if I do value more power over spin? For the SUPERCOURTs in particular, 100%. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. All right, next we are looking at a paddle that didn't get too much time in the spotlight here. This is the Black Ace paddle, or the new paddles from Pro KENNEX, the new De La Rosa edition in particular. I did get this paddle courtesy of my guys over at Pickleball Central, which over there, my code is always RHAPSODY, the month in 2 numerals, and then 25 for this year being 2025. So for example, if you're seeing this in February, the code is RHAPSODY 0225. If it is March or later, for example, it would be RHAPSODY 0325, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So shout out to my guys at Pickleball Central. Shout out to Chris Carson. What a legend. But essentially, this paddle's super interesting. So again, raw carbon fiber face. We get that weirdness with the handle here that I was talking about earlier. If you can't tell, this is a really sort of narrow looking paddle handle. But it has really, really nice and long handle for those two-handed backhands. This is a trademark of De La Rosa's paddles in particular. The design, I think some people are going to think this is tacky. I think it's pretty awesome. I think it sort of fits the sort of like black ace, like card decks, like gambling, whatever vibe. I think that that is really cool. And then the main innovation that's come to this, it is also, I should mention, it is edgeless up until probably the 2 and 10 o'clock positions up here on the paddle, so just over the top, which does make adding any weight up here much harder. Not a little bit harder, much harder, which I do think it could use some, because the paddle does feel very light and very quick in the hands. Could use some weight up here for sure, which is a little bit inconvenient. But the main thing about this paddle is, I don't know if you can hear this, but so this paddle has tungsten beads that outline the edges. And essentially what happens here is theoretically, the point is that wherever the ball strikes, the beads will absorb the impact at that spot and allow the ball to come off with a little bit more stability. It would explain a lot why you get pretty low twist weight numbers for this paddle, but I did not feel that it was terribly unstable. I would say the main gripes with the paddle are that it does not hit very hard. And then the resets in particular don't feel entirely natural. It's a complete opposite story playing offense versus defense with this paddle, which is a really interesting phenomenon. Like when you are going and actively pushing the ball, whether it's a dink or whether it's a drop, or actively swinging at the ball on a full-on shot like a drive, the paddle actually feels really nice, and you can actually reap the benefits of having those beads in there redistribute where the ball impact is. My primary issue with the paddle is that on the opposite side, when it comes to defense, when you're hitting blocks or when you are digging for the ball, any sort of motion where the paddle remains static and you're simply trying to get the ball back does not have the same effect. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that your swing motion kind of compensates for sort of movement of the beads. It allows the beads to sort of get into a relatively good position for where the ball is going to hit already. When it comes to resets, your paddle is normally sideways or upside down, and so the beads are sort of staying where they are. So the ball hits up here. You see how it makes a completely different sound. You get, it's because the beads are in the wrong spot. And so I think that that's a major contributor to why it doesn't feel so great on defense. But from an offensive standpoint, super fast in the hands, super easy to manipulate the ball with, really good spin. Love the design. I think improvements to the handle, and then probably Gen 2 constructing this straight up, like, or just having better foam injections along the edges, maybe making the edge guard go all the way as opposed to making it edgeless down here, would do wonders for this paddle. But overall, it was super fun to use. All right, next we're looking at the Honolulu J2K Plus. Now, this is a paddle that I will probably review. I'm going to get some time, but I will do this one. The reason is I was going back and forth on this one for a while, which is why I hadn't done it to date. This paddle is constructed with a floating core, very similar to the 11624 new power paddles. And other than that, it takes in all of the same technology that you know and love from the original J2K. I think that was my paddle of the year 2024. I don't think a lot of other content creators really disagreed with that. But the main thing with this paddle is that the owner did come out and say that this paddle will reach peak performance and may not last more than 3 months. So I'm pretty sure this paddle is priced in the 160, 170 range. Of course, you take 10% off with code RAFA. Actually, the code RAFA-Kevlar brings the paddle down by $20, which is a little bit more of a discount than just 10%. If you guys are wondering, you can use code RAFA on anything else for Honolulu, which right now I would say that most paddles are recommendable outside of the J5 and maybe the C2. I think they're just a little bit They're weird shapes, not huge fans. But the J2K Plus essentially plays like a J2K with that same sweet spot forgiveness and that same level of spin, but just more power. And it sounds like a dream when you understand how many people love the J2K. You know, you can go out and get the J2K Plus and sort of keep up with the more powerful paddles that are out there. But with that notice coming from the owner about the lifespan of the paddle, it makes things a little bit more complicated. And, you know, it puts me in a weird spot, and it puts a lot of content creators, I think, in a weird spot, because most paddles realistically last 3, 4 to 6 months. And that's just that has sadly become an accepted fact for the vast majority of paddles. Do I think it should be that way? 1000% no. But that's the reality. Especially when it comes to these paddles, the Gen 3, Gen 4 constructed, or not Gen 4, but rather Gen 3 paddles. So it's almost a different story for a company to come out and say that it is how it is versus sort of just having that run in the background as an accepted fact. In my opinion, I'm coming down to the realization that because it's essentially the same thing, you at least know what you're getting off the bat. I would prefer the transparency over just buying the paddle straight up and then finding out later that it takes, you know, a few months at most and it degrades down to benefit. So I am going to give this paddle its flowers. I will give it that review. There are a couple of things I don't like about it. For example, I don't think they did a lot to update the stability, which is a major point for me beforehand. I also think that the grit level is relatively smooth, so the spin is not too much. It is changed. It is increased from the J2K, but not as much as it probably could have been. But yeah, other than that, I do think that this is a good paddle. I think it's a good upgrade from the J2K, as long as you continue to accept the fact that it's not going to a paddle that's not theoretically going to last you more than 4 to 5 months of hard play. So for the recreational player, it might last longer, but for the average person, might be a relatively short-lived paddle. All right, next penultimate paddle here is the Thrive Smoke. This paddle coming in, again, raw carbon fiber face, very head heavy paddle. The swing weight is around, mine is around 118, although it's worth noting that as with all of their other paddles, Thrive does allow you to customize your swing weight, which is really nice. The 14.5 millimeter shape or size of the core makes you immediately want to compare this to a Paddle Tech because they're the only other company that uses that same core thickness. But in reality, this isn't a paddle that I would compare to a Paddle Tech. Again, balance point is shifted a little high. I would say that, excuse me, dude, that Celsius is kind of messing me up. But the sweet spot is not terribly large when you play the paddle stock. This paddle may break in, to be honest. I've only played with it for a couple of hours so far. So I'm going to need to give more thoughts on this when I've hit it more. But what I noticed right off the bat is it does have a little bit of a heavier, a little bit more of a just harder to swing, especially at the net. The fast hands are definitely not there with this paddle. This is the type of paddle that if you love head-heavy ball paddles with really solid plow through, then you would love this. But for me personally, wanting a paddle that wants a little bit more, or rather a paddle that offers a little bit more at the net, this paddle is not quite there. But overall, again, it's a paddle from an offensive standpoint that feels really nice. I do think that the handle, there's not a lot of forgiveness in the sweet spot, and you can really tell because it does feel very stiff, especially in this throat connection here between the head and the handle. This is one of this throat area is the most important area when it comes to determining the forgiveness of a sweet spot. And so when it comes down to that here, this feeling as rigid as it does is probably what feeds into the fact that the sweet spot's not super forgiving. But overall, I think when it comes to plow through and offensive ability, this is a paddle that does offer a lot. When it comes down to defense, the fact that it's so head heavy allows your hands to sort of naturally fall down in order to provide those defensive resets. It's a poppy paddle for sure, so that makes resets even better. I really just think it comes down to maneuverability and hand speed. Those are the primary, and forgiveness of the sweet spot, I should say. Those are the primary gripes so far, but not a bad paddle. I think this is promising if I just hit it a few more times. So we'll revisit that. And lastly, we're creating our little mountain here. Last thing here on the docket is the JOOLA Pro 4s. So these JOOLA paddles are really interesting so far. Again, there's not much that I can say with regards, to a review standpoint or anything like that. But a lot of you watched my video that just sort of broke down the primary expectations that we have of these paddles. So far, I've hit the AGASSI Pro 14 as well as the PERSEUS 16. So JOOLA sent everybody home with the PERSEUS 16, and then instead of opting for the PERSEUS 14 to do a full PERSEUS review, I went for the AGASSI Pro 14. And the main reason I did this is because this is the paddle of choice for Austin Kim, who is one of the main brains, him and Fabio at JOOLA. Shout out to those guys. Are the main brains behind bringing this paddle to market, but it's also the preference of Andre Agassi. So using these paddles both for a while, I do think that the PERSEUS 16, which I think a lot of people are going to be super interested in. I think that there's a lot of promise here. What I'm essentially evaluating at this point, this is a paddle that, to be honest, overall feels very 3S-esque. I think that's the extent of what I can probably say without getting in trouble so far. But what I'm essentially evaluating at this point is this paddle different enough from a 3S in order to recommend it over the 3S, which is going to be a price difference of $20 to $40. But I think I've got to say the design, not a fan. I really thought when I first saw the pictures of this, when they got leaked, I was hoping that this was just the prototype design, but it is not. So it's not terrible, but I really preferred the sort of outstanding branding that we got on previous JOOLA paddles. I think even, on the Agassi shape, like having the name up the sides and stuff like that. I liked it. I liked having a little bit more, people will talk about, oh, the design in the middle will affect you when you strike the ball. No, it won't. If you really think that the spin level matters that much when you have a design over it, I think you're just bad at generating spin. I'm just going to be straight up with you. But yeah, not a huge fan of the design. Feels very 3S on these paddles. This one is a unique feel that I think the design is super unattractive, but I do think in the end, people will find this paddle, one of the better performers out of the lineup. So that'll be fun for people to sort of discover over time. But essentially for the upcoming review, which there will be a full breakdown as soon as we are able to talk about them. It's just going to come down to, are these paddles recommendable at their price point over the 3Ss? And that is sort of the long and short of that. And that is going to cover the entire segment of paddles that I've been testing, and also conclude this first edition of the pod. So if you stuck around here to the end, all of the yapping about everything that's happened this week, thank you so much for watching and for your support. Remember to like and subscribe, comment down below, questions for the next pod, any opinions on everything I talked about today, things that you want to see in the upcoming reviews. If you have a preference for which paddles that I went through today that you do want to see reviews on as soon as I can get a chance. Definitely let me know. Once again, links to the Discord channel, links to the, why am I dancing like this? Links to the Discord channel, links to the Excel spreadsheet with the paddles to support the medical trip to Guatemala are both in the description, as well as the description to check out into the AM. Again, can't recommend the basics enough. Haven't had a chance to try out the graphics yet, but from the basic standpoint, these guys have it down to a T, so would highly recommend. And again, my code gets you 10% off. So with all that in mind, that wraps us up here. Thanks to y'all for watching, and I hope you all stay happy and healthy, and of course, out on the courts. Until the next video. Peace.